Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel once again. It's good to see you. And as I greet you today, I am delighted to say that we've reached 8,000 subscribers for the channel this very day, thanks to all of your fantastic support. Thanks so much to my subscribers and to my members. I couldn't have done it without all of you. It really makes a difference how you support me. So thank you so much from the very bottom of my heart. Anyhow, on to today's video. It's been a while. I've taken a bit of time away from YouTube. I wasn't feeling so well and a little bit of the ups and downs. And on Mental Health Awareness Week, it's important to reflect and take the time to look after yourself and make sure that your well-being is being focused on. So I hope you do the same if you're having similar issues. And remember that you're never alone. But anyway, this video is all about guests. I have a wonderful guest with me for this episode. His name is Jeremy Chapman. I'm sure you will know and have heard of him. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. He works for Microsoft Mechanics as a director. He's got his own YouTube channel as well. We're going to be talking all about Copilots and much more beyond. So without any further ado, let's hit the titles and check it out. Hi, I want to welcome my guest to the channel today. I am very thrilled and delighted to be joined by Jeremy Chapman from Microsoft. Many of you will know Jeremy from the Microsoft Mechanics series and lots of Microsoft events that are going on throughout the years. Jeremy, welcome. It's great to have you with me today. How are you been?
Thanks so much, Peter. It's great to be on. I got to say, it's a great break because it's getting really warm out here in the Pacific Northwest, kind of atypically for May. So it's good to actually have a break from that and be in a nice, cool environment and really chat with friends effectively on generative AI and Copilot. And this is always a treat for me to reach new audiences and do what I can in terms of trying to explain the machinery, the mechanics of our different products and services.
Oh, wonderful. Absolutely. That's what we're all about here on this channel as well. So just briefly, for those of you who have maybe in this community been living under a rock and have not seen you around, well, you've been at Microsoft for a very long time, haven't you? Well over 15 years. You're a director at Microsoft. Can you just
Yep.
speak briefly about your role at Microsoft right now and your history, if you would?
Yeah, so I've been at Microsoft now. It's been over 19 years, actually. Let's see if we make it all the way to 20. But
Mhm.
basically, I started out in an IT role. I've worked in Germany. I've worked in mainland China, doing various kind of IT roles. I was in the kind of early .com days in Germany, which was super exciting in an incubation startup campus environment. And then in China, I was basically building out different solutions. We did everything from building call centers and different logistics things. We built out basically the almost equivalent of like an Amazon.com type service for the company I worked for in China, selling books and other goods. So that was pretty fun. And then doing also the IT. And one of my last projects that I worked on was doing the XP rollouts in that at that time because it was in the
Wow.
early 2000s. So then I came from China and moved back. My wife and I, our son was born in China. We actually moved back to the U.S. We wanted to after a while, and basically, at some point, I started working for Microsoft first in the capacity as a vendor, working on business desktop deployment. If you remember that solution accelerator, and then I
Yeah.
started with the solution accelerators team, which was like a dream job because you could basically solve all these different problems, build automation, and all these things that basically hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people could use.
Mhm.
Everything from best practice analyzers, security, guidance, doing desktop deployments at scale, all of that stuff. For everything from Windows to Exchange to you name it. And that was really really fun. So then I went from there into kind of Windows deployment and application compatibility and that side of things, and I was there for the Windows 7 timeframe. And then I moved into the Office team effectively during the kind of click to run and Pro Plus days to figure out how do we repackage Office and make that so it deploys at scale using application virtualization effectively under the covers, and did all of that. And then after that, from there, that's where we call the Garage series at the time, if you remember those days,
Oh, yeah,
um,
I
where
do.
that was basically about trying to debunk some of the misunderstandings and things around Office 365 Pro Plus, that it
Mhm.
always needs to run in a browser, that the machine needs to be online all the time, and activation's never going to work, and all these things. whereas we had to like say it's a local copy, locally installed on the hard drive. Licensing can be not talking to those servers for a long period of time, et cetera. And working with the System Center team at the time, which became the Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager and Intune teams. And so all of that stuff then kind of swelled into what became the mechanics, and that went company-wide. And then Microsoft Mechanics now is everything from the modern work, as we call it, Microsoft 365 and Copilot side of the house, as well as everything from Biz Apps to Azure to data and AI, the Surface team, anything that's basically got a commercial kind of flavor to it, where you have IT professionals, developers that are working in that context. We want to make sure that people understand what our different services do. Do they make sense? Is there value in it for them? And how would I deploy these things at scale in my organization if I were to do that? And what does that look like? So that's kind of, I would say, what the charter is in general in terms of Microsoft Mechanics. But it's been a fun ride, like moving to those different progressions, starting 19 years ago until getting to where I'm at now.
Oh, amazing. You've made me feel very nostalgic about a lot of my journey as well. I remember those XP days and Windows 7. I remember the early days of Click to Run and getting familiar with that. And good times, good memories, and a lot of hard work and a lot of progression along the way for sure. Fantastic stuff. So, on the show today, we want to talk all about something you've alluded to already there, Jeremy, which is data and AI and generative AI in general, but Copilot probably in particular. And I know that there's a lot that you want to share with the audience today about things like RAG orchestration and how that relates to security. If you were just sort of setting the scene of what that is and how it all relates and so on and so forth, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing, and I've been talking to a lot of people lately in terms of, what is Copilot? What is Copilot Pro, that experience? What is the Microsoft, 365 variant Copilot for Microsoft 365? Then you have things that even build on that, like Copilot for Sales, for example, that even add Dynamics or Salesforce data into the mix of that. And there's extensibility on top of that. So, I mean, the biggest thing that I would say in terms of talking with a lot of people, the thing that I hear the most is like, oh, yeah, Copilot for Microsoft 365 gives you generative AI like in the different apps. So I don't have to leave that app and go to a browser and have to do it through copy paste or something. And that's where I would say that's kind of one of the biggest misunderstandings in terms of, yes, that is one of the experiences. You can work in the context of your favorite app, if that's Outlook or if that's, Word or PowerPoint or Excel, etc. Loop, OneNote, you name it. There's a bunch of great different experiences. And there's also the graph-grounded chat experience that you can get to from Teams or copilot.microsoft.com. So there's all these different endpoints that you can access the experiences from. But the big thing, at least in my opinion, and kind of the way I think about it, is getting to my personal, data that I work on every day. And I know that you've got a lot of security folks watching. People are doing data and access management and permissions. Just the stuff that I can access, I'm allowed to see, I'm allowed to actually reference. And that means that I can do some more powerful things. So imagine, for example, I want to create a document that's based on another document that I previously wrote, but has updated data. Like maybe I'm creating KB articles, which I've actually done as a part of my career path. And I want to update that with a new topic or a set of new topics, or I'm building, sales letters of intent or something. Those are the types of things that you can really generate very quickly, to where instead of going through that, the process of taking like field by field and doing copy paste, even if you have a template, where that can take a long time. These are the kind of things where the generative AI has reasoning built in. So you can basically reference the files that you have access to, for example, in SharePoint or OneDrive. Some people might say SharePoint and OneDrive are more or less the same thing. But you can basically do the / or do reference a file, start typing the file name, pull up the file that you want and say, here's the file that I want to create basically a very close facsimile to. Then I want to add a second file, / reference a second file, and bring in this new data for it. Now, what did that do? I mean, the big difference there compared to, say, using it through Copilot within kind of Microsoft, Copilot.microsoft.com and Bing, et cetera, is I don't have to like take a big block of text and copy paste it over. And then the other problems I get in those situations are I might have character limits where I can only put in 2,000 or 4,000 characters into those different fields. So I got to do it in a bunch of different chunks. So then at some point, it doesn't become way more productive than if I just took a template and started filling in different sections of it. So we want to be able to take that entire end-to-end workflow, give it basically one document for inspiration, give it more material for data and for context, have it look to the web if you need to, and then it will build out that material to where it gives you a nice draft. And it is Copilot for a reason. It's not doing the entire thing to 100% accuracy exactly to where you're going to want it in the end, but it's getting you past that kind of blank page syndrome and getting you maybe 60, 70, 80% of the way there to where you can kind of proof it and add your personalization to it, add the photos or images that you want to add to the file, and a bit more formatting and structuring, those types of things to make it more what you want in the end. So those are the more powerful experiences. So it's not just like a little generative AI window that sits in the various app endpoints. It's that plus personalization in terms of knowing what data you have access to and you being able to reference that material as well. The other thing that I love about you, because it's something I use every day, is something like meeting recap, where I'm often late to meetings because I'm often back to back on Teams calls, pretty much throughout the day. So I might be 4 minutes or 6 minutes late to the next meeting. I can go into the transcript and literally catch up while I was late. I will obviously apologize for being late because it's not a great thing, but a lot of times my meetings will go over. But those types of things are just lifesavers. I mean, being able to do that, or if you have to completely miss a meeting, going back to the recap and then seeing, what was said, the Copilot actually summarizing that meeting for you, any action items that were resulting from that meeting. Those are things that I use all the time, in addition to just like working on mechanics content, of course, and all those things that I do, using Copilot. So those are kind of my favorite capabilities and the things that that really excite me about it. And the last thing I would say is, I mentioned to you before we started recording, we were just recording with Mark Rasinovich, and there were a lot of terms and things and phrases and acronyms and new stuff, new concepts. And the nice thing is you can ask Copilot with basically internet grounding to say, like, what is this? What is low rank adaptive fine tuning or something like that? Yeah. What is low boil dielectric fluid if you're talking about data center liquid cooling? And it will actually give you a nice summary of what those things are, because not everybody has the encyclopedic knowledge of, say, Mark Rasinovich to be able to know all of these things. So it really gives you that advantage as well, as opposed to like clicking through a bunch of links to find information about that. The orchestration is doing that for you. And that's really, I think, what the differentiator is in general, is the orchestration.
Oh, completely agree with everything you said there, Jeremy. And I've been finding my way around the various co-pilots in recent months since we've had them available to us, where I work at Insight. And also in my role as an MVP, where we're fortunate enough to have access to some of these things as well. And I've got to I think everyone's going to find their own Copilot experience, right? They're going to find the way that they will enjoy working with it and get the most benefit from. I'm exactly as you've mentioned there. I'm looking up things that I don't know quite often because it's impossible to know everything, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing things. So I'm getting the answers to those sort of things. I'm doing it for things like these videos. I'm using Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, the animal formerly known as Bing Chat Enterprise, to do my video titles and descriptions to help me with those. Mm-hmm. But you're exactly right that it's a starting point. It's a Copilot, and what you get from it is not necessarily going to be what you want to use. You've got to put your own stamp onto that and tweak it and refine it and get it to be where you want it to be. So next, you mentioned a little bit about the orchestrations relating to all of this, and wondered if you could touch on that for us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Basically, as I mentioned, if you've got like two files in here, this is one that we will use, but not the screen for a future mechanics on Extensibility, ironically. But basically, so let's say I've got the left side on my screen, got my existing KB article, and you can see it looks like a normal internal document that I might create as somebody in the IT team to show what works, what's supported, etc., for people that are joining their devices for management. The other thing I didn't mention in my background, but I did a lot of MDM and device management and deployment. I guess I did mention that. So this will give you that experience. And then if you look at the right-hand side, we've got something new, which is remote help in Intune, and maybe that's different than TeamViewer or something else I'm using. So I started taking notes on what the process looks like to run that. So now if I run Copilot, and these are the file references. So here I've / mentioned KB818, which is what we saw on the left as the original one to copy, and then the Intune doc with the notes on the right. And so when I ask it to create that file, a new file that's basically a help article, using those two things, one is input, one is new information, then you can see it's actually authoring me a really nice KB article
Ooh.
for remote help, in this case, based on Intune remote help. And as you can probably tell, based on all the different additional text, it's gone to the web and it's searched on Microsoft.com for Intune remote help data as well in order to augment the new KB article. So it's going to effectively create, something that's, I would say, 80-90% of where it needs to be. And it will just take a couple of moments to generate. And I didn't speed any of this up, by the way. So then once you look at it and you say, this looks pretty good, you can keep it. And then you can basically, from there, if you want to modify it or do anything, you can do that right from this article. So this one looks pretty good. So at that point, you just need to hit keep it, or you can keep iterating, which is what we call like a few shot or another couple shots against the prompts to make it, make it more formal or make it a different tone, etc. And then the next one is like, okay, so how would something like that work in PowerPoint? And this is kind of a cool one because PowerPoint can now look in Word and take the same document and create a presentation from it. So you can access the PowerPoint add in from the upper right-hand corner. Then you can say, just create a presentation about / mention or refer to your document. And then it will basically respond to you and ingest what was in that notes doc that I showed earlier on the right hand side of the screen and start drafting a presentation for me again, consuming the content that it has and actually building and formatting slides in PowerPoint format. So just as a differentiator vis-a-vis like what you might do with, say, pasting it into a Bing window with just text output, this is giving you all the PowerPoint formatting and creating the content for you with, by referencing that document that you had earlier.
I'm loving it. I can't believe what it's already doing in the short time that we've got to know the various co-pilots. I feel like we've had it, I don't know, maybe it's close to a year now, thereabouts, and we're barely scratching the surface. And it's amazing what we're doing already. So I can't imagine what's going to come next with the co-pilots as it gets refined, developed, and on to the next level.
Yeah. There's a lot more to come. This is one of the biggest moving spaces in general, and even on the hardware side, which because it takes a lot of infrastructure to run the larger large language models. And then the other thing that's really exciting for me, at least because I'm kind of a bit of a nerd, is like Phi 3, for example, and getting a small language model effectively an SLM. You've got all the LLMs. This one can run on a competent phone. I've got it running on a few different phones, and some are faster than the other. But these are things that you can run now and basically use on mobile devices, and they're not, in terms of reasoning, they're not as great as, say, using a large language model if you really want to get specific. And one of the real examples is we were trying to get different completions built from the different models, and Phi 3 medium, which is the largest of them, I think it's got 14 billion parameters, and then the mini is 3.8 billion. In the medium one, you can have it phrase things like it was Yoda from Star Wars. And in the mini one, it doesn't have the context of Yoda, so it doesn't know how to phrase things as Yoda, which was a real, it was a real nerdy data point, but a real data point because when you're trimming down and getting to the smallest number of parameters, because you've got to use like textbook text and things that are high quality to get it to the smallest number of parameters possible. It can't know like all of the, like the basically pop culture memes, which is Star Wars in our case. But, think of all the other things that you might want to do. And if you want to, look up various historians or philosophers or various other things, the large language models are basically the base training is almost, I wouldn't say infinitely complex, but much more complex, obviously, than a smaller language model that might have 100th of the number of parameters that it's been trained on.
So what I love about Microsoft Copilot in particular is that it's not going to train that large language model. So you're getting that protection that you need for your data, which is absolutely key for me being a security person. And I'm having
Mhm.
conversations with clients that I work with about how important it is to have their data ready for the Copilot experience. And there's always this fine balance of convenience, usability versus security. But I think what Copilot is doing, it's very much for me enabling the security story, especially things like Microsoft Purview with DLP, with labeling,
Mhm.
the importance of that, which is going to be more relevant than ever before.
That's right. That's right. The big thing there is that you've got basically your data boundary, your protection boundary. And so Copilot for Microsoft 365, as are any of the commercial variants and experiences, those are going to stay within that data boundary, again, bounded by the access management and the what you've put in place in terms of policies that users can access. And that's one, I would say, one piece where you do want to take a look at, what are some of the access controls that you have in place. But I think we'll park that for a second and go back to that conversation, because there's another thing about this, which is basically the two phases of a large language model, and that there's one phase of training, and we mentioned all the different billion parameters with the Phi 3 models, and then when you get into something like GPT 3.5 or 4 or 4 Turbo, where it gets into 175 billion plus parameters, those are long term, like exercises that happen kind of completely separate from the inferencing side of things. So inferencing is just a fancy word to say running, operating the different models. So I think the collectively, publicly, we're past the, it is just one. A lot of people used to think it was just one. It's one large language model, one AI that does the whole thing. There are multiple instances of these large language models, and you kind of see that now if you do start to play with things like Phi 3 Mini.
Yeah.
And you can run them locally on a device, or if you think of a massive one, you can run them on a cluster of servers. And we talked about our supercomputer last year with 10,000 networked GPUs, NVIDIA V100s at the time.
Mm.
Mark even talked about in November 14,400 networked GPUs that are running the H100 series from NVIDIA. Those are massive, and that's done for the training side of things. So for inference, it's not as compute intensive, but for training, when you're training it on those hundreds of billions of parameters, you need a massive amount of compute. Once it's done training, though, that's done. Think of it like a calculator. When you take the calculator away from the factory or buy it from the retail store and you start doing, calculations on it, it doesn't like remember it in terms of the base training of how to compute calculations. It doesn't, relearn that 2 times 2 is 4. All of that training happened when it was in the factory during the training phase, effectively,
Mm.
as it was programmed. So it's very much isolated to that training side of the house. Whereas inferencing, that's just computing output. It's basically like a language calculator. Then as it's computing, what you're trying to do. So that's the one thing. So it's not learning effectively. Like, you can't humanize it in that sense where people think, well, I'm writing prompts to it and it seems to be remembering me and what I'm asking it and stuff. And one other thing to remember, which is related to that, is the session. What is a session? And these are kind of weird. You've got these new terms like training, inference, grounding. What's a session? A session is just how long you have a running conversation with the generative AI bot, whatever that is.
Mm.
So it has the context. Every time you ask it a new question, it takes the context from the previous question in that active session. So you might wonder, well, why do I have these like clean up or new session or other commands as part of this chat experience? Because basically what you're doing is purging that temporary cache of what's in that session to start a completely clean conversation.
Mm.
It's like purging your internet history on your browser so that it doesn't know like what sites you visited, and it can't auto input passwords and those kind of things. That's all based on the session memory that you have. And then the same thing, by the way, is true if, like say there's an OpenAI technology around quote unquote memory. Those are all sitting off to the side of the LLM. So it can basically do retrieval against those components. And then whatever you prompt it, it's augmenting that with things that you do not see, and that's kind of an important concept here. The things that you see are the prompts that you write and the responses that you give it. If there's session history, you can kind of see that because you can scroll up and see what you've asked it. But then when you start to add orchestration and retrieval and going to the internet for grounding, and grounding's another new weird term, which means basically search and finding additional information about what you're trying to ask it. All of that stuff is happening as things that you do not see effectively in the background. So your 10-word prompt that you're writing, and prompt's another weird word, the question that you're asking, it's finding maybe 10,000 or 1,000 additional words and things and commands and additional context and appending that to your 10 words. And then that is what gets presented to the LLM. And the LLM then can do inferencing. It's not training or learning or remembering any of that content that you've just asked it or the stuff that's done in the background to augment your prompt. It's just using that from that session, answering your question effectively if it's a question that you asked or a command that you gave it to do. And that's the end of it. And basically, that's why, for example, multiple organizations are sharing the same LLM, because that inferencing side is by default not connected to training. Therefore, if person A and person B are using the same model, there's no way that the model can give person B the questions or answers from person A, because they're not actually learning during inference. They're just taking those inputs as part of your prompt and whatever was augmented with that you didn't see, and answering your question or responding to your prompt.
Oh, fantastic stuff. It's really clever and really interesting to hear how it all comes together behind the scenes and presents to the users to get the benefits of Copilot. And it explains a lot about some of the experience I've noticed when I'm using Microsoft Copilot, where if I have a session open, I've asked it something, and then I'll go and I'll come back to it later. If I've left it too long, it says, you need to start a new session. So I guess that's an example of that in action, yeah.
Well, and one of the funny things, and because I was going from the get go, like back, was it November of 2022, and I was watching all the different press coverage and also submitting my prompts, and you could see, like, for example, some of the fun things at the time when I was fairly new to the conversation was like, I'd ask it, what's in the cinemas, what's playing? It would give me back like results from September 2021, which is a year earlier. I was like, that's not right, because it wasn't doing web grounding. That was the first kind of encounter that, there was some limitations in terms of the information it could retrieve, which, by the way, is another case for using web grounding. For example, if something's trained, and a lot of the things you'll see that now, because the models, I would say, respond more openly. Like, my training set ended as of September 2021, so I cannot answer anything. So I'm a big NFL fan for the Seattle Seahawks and local teams. And like, if I ask it who the quarterback is, a lot of times they'll say Russell Wilson's the quarterback, but he was traded a long time ago. Unless you do web grounding. And once you turn on internet web grounding, which basically means, again, that back-end process can go and look and find, no, it's Geno Smith. It's not Russell Wilson anymore. He's now 2 teams traded away from the Seahawks. Those are the kind of things that web grounding gets you. So all of that, I mean, it basically, that's kind of a lot of how that works under the covers. And then the other thing that was happening, I think, back in the early days of kind of, I would say, the beta timeframe of ChatGPT is you would start to like have long sessions with it before they had session limits, or what's called basically the system prompt, or the the meta prompt, as sometimes we call it, which is basically giving you the kind of instructions. You should behave like this, answer and be courteous and friendly, and cite your sources and all these things. That's your system message. In the early days, you might have a session limit, a character count limit, where it would have actually, if you kept asking questions and it kept responding, it would basically push the system prompt out of the cache. So then there was no more system prompt. So then other weird things would happen. And that's where I think a lot of the, fun responses would occur, or things that it shouldn't say, etc. Because at that point, they didn't reserve that cache space in the early days. You basically bump it out of the session. And so that was kind of happening either directly or indirectly based on how many characters it could view as part of the initial prompt response and retrieval and orchestration. So one way or the other, that system message didn't get abided by. So those are the kind of things that we've obviously worked through a lot since then, in terms of being able to do all of the filtering and make sure that the system messages are in place to continue, the expected behavior of the Copilot experience or the GPT style experience, as you prompt it with, what you want to prompt it with, so it responds, in the way that you want it to respond.
Oh, amazing. And one word you've mentioned a couple of times, Jeremy, is extensibility, which is very, very interesting to me in terms of, can you talk a little bit about how co-pilots are set up for that future proofing of extensibility? Is it all baked in and ready to go from that perspective?
Yeah, the extensibility story is pretty cool in terms of, again, adding another additional layer of personalization. So if you think about extensibility, there's kind of two different ways you can extend, and sometimes we'll use the same methods to do both. So on
Hmm.
the one hand, extensibility is basically saying, I want, additional data sources. I've got a human resources app, or I've got something else that has data in it, and I've got an API that I want to call that will bring that information in. With the plugin model, you can also write actions back if you want to. Like, let's say, we've decided, like, let's say it is an HR system and we've decided to go to the next phase of interview or something, and then second interview, and those things you could write back to the system. And that's what the plugin will give you. Basically, you're plugging in additional context for Copilot to work. And again, those are things that you can also bind based on access requirements of that user, so that you're using things like Microsoft Entra ID as
Hmm.
part of, brokering that connection, making sure that the API can only return things that that person's available to see, and or turning off or on the plugin for the right user, so that your sales team doesn't see HR plugins and vice versa. So those are the kind of things that you can set up. Then there's a second way to get external data, which is basically by using a graph connector, which is not new, by the way.
Hmm.
The Microsoft Graph we've had for a long time. I think we've started doing mechanics content on it, in 2015 or something. But basically, what you can do with the graph is say, I want to index additional content that sits outside of my Microsoft 365 boundary. It might be on my intranet. It might be another set. It might be public sites where I publish information. All this. There might be a wiki that's on a third party kind of server, whatever. There's a bunch of different connector options and types. It could be running in Azure. It could be running on prem. And then basically what happens is that will go out and index those sites based on the rules and what you allow it to do, and kind of the tree of things that you allow it to index. And that way, when you search for something in Microsoft Search in general, and Microsoft365.com, or any of the other endpoints that will do Microsoft Search, it will not only show what's in M365 and OneDrive, but it will also show what's in the connected sources that you've connected with the Microsoft Graph. So that means that Copilot, again, using your permissions, your access management as that user who's interacting with that Copilot endpoint, as you do a search, it's only going to look up what you have access to. And again, the connectors can limit access and retrieval to certain sites, to certain groups or individuals in the organization, again, predicated on like their Entra IDs or their group affiliation. So you've got full control over how that works. And these are all expanding effectively where data can be found and or interacted with. Then there's another concept which is more like building a specialized experience, kind of a build your own type of Copilot app. And we see a lot of that also with things like Azure and AI Studio, where you say, ignore everything. I have one folder, one SharePoint site, one thing that I want you to really, really focus on. Yes, you can use web grounding, etc., but prioritize that one folder that I'm pointing you to, because I'm just doing whatever sales, letters of intent, and proposals and things, and that's all I want you to focus on.
Hmm.
So you can build a focused experience then, like that with, and these are lowercase c copilots, by the way, custom copilots that you build in-house that would be able to focus in on the content that you want to point it to. And or if you want to use plugins to be able to write back to them, you can do those things too. And that's where I think having all the different options gives you a lot of great experiences that you can build out, either by kind of modifying what Microsoft copilots do and kind of more the SaaS version of that, or using more of the PaaS flavors through Azure, for example. And with Azure, it's nice because you can plug in and out different language models if you want to change, from GPT to Llama to a Phi model, etc. Those types of things are things that are built into the platform. If you've got models on Hugging Face, for example, you want to basically swap in and out the underlying LLMs they make it super easy with things like Azure AI Studio to be able to do that.
So that's all absolutely amazing stuff, Jeremy. So powerful. In terms of the orchestration piece, is that something you can help us all to understand in a visual form? Is that something you're able to share with us?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of doing mechanics, as well as being able to visualize things. I'm going to start with the real basics in terms, like I said, a lot of this is around what you see, what you don't see. So if we think about just Copilot in general, what does Copilot for Microsoft 365 do? It's not just the experiences inside the apps. It is all things large language model that run it. The Microsoft Graph, like I mentioned, to be able to reference files. The internet is another grounding source in your apps. Now, in the Graph, if you haven't heard of that, and I bet a lot of people have, is basically everything that can Microsoft Search can find: your emails, your calendar, your messages, your Teams activities, those types of things. And basically, what it can do is basically take your prompt. If you're asking it, like, what are the recent emails that I had with Peter, it will find those and summarize those to create that informed response back in the application where you started, so that you don't have to leave the context of your app. Now, that's the simple view, the 100 level, like really, really basic view. But I think since we have a lot of IT pros watching right now that are doing this as their day job, I apologize for this if it's a little bit too busy or dense, this slide, but I think this is the one that kind of goes into more of the depth and detail. And let me just walk through, because I actually find these things more helpful almost, especially when I do some pointing. So hopefully you can see my laser pointer here. It's probably the best way. I'm a good practitioner of sysinternal zoom it as well, but I'll stick with this for now. So basically, when you think about a prompt that comes in, so this is your window of where you're submitting your prompt from. Now, the first little padlock icon here is a filter. So the filter might be for things that you shouldn't be asking, like if you've got things that are just not legal, or things that are objectionable in terms of just generally like behavior as a person. A lot of those filters will come in, or maybe some more lighthearted stuff. You're trying to jailbreak it, or get information about like how everything works and things that it knows that it's not able to respond to. It will filter those things out, and it might say, or like for example, like I mentioned, the training content stopping at 2021 September. It might be able to say, oh, you're asking for something beyond September 2021, and you've turned off web grounding, therefore I cannot answer you. So that first filter is kind of like the first gate, like when Gandalf's saying whether you can pass or not. And then after you're allowed to, then you kind of go in through. And at that point, it's processing your prompt, and it's looking at the intent of your prompt. It's looking at additional things to say, like, okay, like in the one I just showed, I'm referencing two different files, and I'm saying if you can't find that information there, go to Microsoft.com sources to find Intune materials. So it can basically parse that into multiple different activities it has to do to go and find additional information behind the scenes to augment our prompt. So my prompt there was fairly long, if you remember that from Word a few demos back. But it's got to basically parse all of that information. It's going to go out and try to find information to add to my prompt. And so it can go out to the web. In that case, it went out to Microsoft.com, found Intune remote help information, and it can potentially go into other plugins. Let's say I have my own KB article. I've got Jira or something wired up against, or ServiceNow wired up against my Copilot. I can have it go out there and look at those articles to where maybe I'm not referencing a SharePoint site for my KB article, but one that's sitting in a KB system. So then it can bring that information back out. It can look in the Microsoft Graph if it needs to. Graph connectors, like I mentioned, or something else that you'd be able to check if the index has been expanded for the graph to look into third-party wikis or other sites that I have access to again. Then I can use the graph to find that additional information. Then it's kind of like, okay, great. I've done everything to find the information. I've collected that, and I've found everything. I've augmented your prompt. Now your whatever 20-word prompt is 2,000 words, and I'm going to send that over to the large language model. Now the large language model says, okay, this looks great. And then it starts to think about responses. Does it have enough content? And it might actually request more content. There might be more passes that it's doing as well. And then it's basically thinking up its response and being able to generate additional tokens out to respond to you. And then there's something we call responsible AI. So responsible AI are, again, like we mentioned, the content filters, those types of things to make sure that the right outputs are being presented back to you, that there's nothing objectionable or hallucinations, those types of things. So getting the content that it needs to make sure that it's accurate. You might have additional content or additional things from your part of the system message and part of the instruction set to cite your sources. Those types of things will be discovered and then sent back. And then what we can do is from there is we can look at the response and we can say, okay, well, maybe you've got protections on that file. Maybe you've got labels or classifications because you either used a classified doc or the generated output contains classified words that, Microsoft Purview and DLP policies and other things or document classifications might trigger. So now we can apply that back and then kind of send it back again until we have everything where we want it to be. And then at that point, once it's at a state that we think that the response is representative of what the user is going to expect, at that point it will send it back to the user. It will go through one more content filter again to make sure that everything looks good, and the voice, tone, the helpfulness, all of those things are again meeting or exceeding expectations. And then it will present it back to the end user. So then you'll have your response back in your app. So those are kind of all of the things that it's doing under the covers. And then I would say in the pre-processing phase, and I just kind of touched on this towards the end, but that's also where it's consuming your system message, your meta prompt that says, you are a professional assistant. You need to abide by corporate standards, and you need to present factual information, be concise, be to the point, or those types of things that you might add in the system prompt. And some of those are part of the the different services that we offer from a Copilot perspective. But those are all things, again, to ensure quality of kind of the grounding process and what the responses will ultimately look like when they're presented back to the user. So this is a high level view. I would encourage you, by the way, two things, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. So one thing I would say is, first, have a look at the show that we did with Seth on Seth Juarez on AI Studio, because if you see things like how prompt flows work, for example, and all the different steps the orchestration can perform, and these are things that you can build and you can modify the actual code underneath it. Then the content filtering policies that you can do as part of that gets it even to be more tangible in terms of what it means. And the last thing I would say is vector search. So I'll probably, this is probably my last topic that I'll mention, because one of the things that the LLM uses, and one of the reasons why these natural language queries work, is, and that you don't have to be a specialist as to what you're querying against these billions of parameters of what's trained, is because what's happening is every time you submit a prompt, it's creating, think of it like a coordinate. If you're, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but we had the Dewey Decimal System. I'm probably aging myself here. But the Dewey Decimal System is in libraries how you'd find similar books that were on the shelves, because they would be clustered based on that numeric system. Think of vector search like that. So you need to have both sides of the query speak the same language. So the billions of data points, like your books and the Dewey Decimal System, spread across the library. Then when you ask a question, that question itself becomes its own Dewey Decimal System number, which is the vector embedding. And then based on that, it will go and retrieve similar topics, and it will say, okay, I've got these other topics, and there's a 95% or 98% degree of likelihood probability that is what you're looking for. That way you don't have to know exactly the term that you're doing. You can say, I want the clothing items I put on my feet, and not know what shoes are as a term, and it will be able to infer that that's what you're talking about. So those are the kind of things vector search is enabling that. And I would say the other thing that's cool with our databases, by the way, is that we're enabling vector search in a lot of the different Azure databases, things like Postgres and Cosmos, to be able to do these things that the LLMs kind of do natively. And that's part of what makes that retrieval and natural language and semantic search work as well. But all of these things, again, are happening behind the scenes, and all of that's part of the additional magic that makes this a lot more useful than copy paste into a kind of a free tool. And that's where the differences are, I think, between those two different approaches. And between that plus the security and the boundaries, that's where things like Copilot for Microsoft 365 are a lot different than if you just go to Bing or go to copilot.microsoft.com without signing in and use it. Those are different experiences because it's basically on you to do the retrieval via paste into the prompt, and there are lots of limitations. And then for the non-commercial services, the ones that are third party, you don't know where that data is going to go. Or like think of OpenAI, the terms and conditions might allow them to train on your prompts and the completions that you do through the large language model and the experiences through ChatGPT, for example. So you don't know where your data is going to go eventually. It might not be today or tomorrow, but a year from now. That's where things, you want to be in a trusted service that has a security boundary, that has the right promises and the right kind of security measures in place to make sure that anything that you interact with in the generative AI prompt and in the response is going to be something that's protected, that you have controls over.
Oh, amazing stuff. I'll certainly link to that video that you mentioned, Jeremy, with Seth, and to the Microsoft Mechanics channel in general as well. Before we wind up, one more thing I do want to ask you actually is, much like myself, in addition to all that you do at Microsoft Mechanics, you are also a YouTuber yourself. You have your own channel. Do you just want to do a little bit of a plug, an intro to that, and what you're hoping to achieve on there, and the sort of content that people can expect if they check you out? And link there as well.
So the backstory for that one was basically when the pandemic hit in March. If you probably will remember, March 2020. We went on like a testing spree to see like what microphones and what cameras and things were working, and then there were a bunch of Teams tips, like how many people didn't know they were on mute, or how many people didn't know how to share the audio with a video. As they were trying to share a video on Teams over screen sharing, for example. So I started taking all of the kind of the knowledge that I gathered, and I actually got really like I developed a fondness for doing it, like as it's become a hobby. My previous hobby was always like I still do to some extent, but did a lot of car stuff. I used to build like Volkswagen show cars and stuff when I was younger. But now I think just like testing out, and I've always been a gadget person, but testing them out, reviewing them, I think the buying, I've probably bought 100 webcams, but they're not too expensive to buy typically. But I have probably 100 different webcams that I've tested and tried out. And then just looking at different things that will help you work from home, or, the small things that solve issues. I upscaling video is another one that I've recently done a lot with, and played with a lot of open source, and, like paid for tools for that. And then like screen recording, I'm personally using a lot of TechSmith Camtasia because I love being able to kind of modify cursor paths and do that. But there are other options that are like built into Windows now that didn't exist, like in the Windows 7, Windows 8 timeframe, that you can do from Windows 10 and Windows 11. So all those types of tips I start putting on my channel, and you can find more or less all of my different social activities. My @handle is @deployjeremy, whether it's on YouTube or on X or etc. And I'm probably most active on YouTube just because video is like the thing I do every day. So I think it's more comfortable for me to be doing my social activity, I guess, through video expression as opposed to like text expression on Twitter and X, because I'm not super active on the Twitter X, and I'm on LinkedIn. I am a bit through mechanics, but not as much on my personal LinkedIn handle.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I'm much the same these days. I'm all about the video content, but I'll be sure to share your channel in the description of this video as well, Jeremy. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell. It's a great channel. I encourage you to go and check it out. But Jeremy, thank you so much for being so generous with your time over a weekend as we record this. It's been lovely to talk to you, a real pleasure, and I hope we get to do it again in the not too distant future. So thank you again so much. Any closing thoughts from you before we wind up?
I was surprised when I saw your channel popped up, and Andy was promoting it, and yeah, you've grown, you've exceeded my rate of growth by a lot. I think my channel is about a year older than yours, so congrats to you. Hopefully, people are getting value from this particular episode and subscribe to your channel as well, because I've seen a lot of great kind of security and other conversations there as well that I've watched, and and getting to know you as well. I think you've got a lot more of your personal topics that are on there. I've stayed pretty like on cameras and gear and software and stuff. So I'm not sure if I'm interesting enough at home or in my personal life, but maybe I'll do that at some point. But yeah, thank you. It's been nice watching your channel grow and develop over the last couple of years or year and a half or whatever, however long it's been.
Oh, just over a year, I think, actually. And what a journey. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've learned so much and will continue to do so. And I feel like I'm only just getting started. But yeah, I do like to color outside the lines of the pure tech only content. And there's topics on here about mental health and well-being and neurodiversity, and also even Star Trek. I've started doing some Star Trek related content as well, because I'm like you, I'm a big nerd, a big geek. I'm into all my Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and all that sort of stuff. So
Yep. Yep.
we could probably talk about so much more. And you are welcome on here anytime, my friend. I hope we get the chance to talk again. And I think people would like to hear your personal story. I really do, because I think people are interested in hearing about the person behind the tech and all that. So I would say to you, never shy away from that. It's always something people like to hear and can relate to.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about it, because I'm my next car. I'm thinking about getting the ID Buzz and doing it like more resto modded as a VW custom kind of thing, like I used to do when I was kind of doing this almost every hour of my spare time. So I might go into that, but it's tough when you start a channel to like stray
Mm.
out from the lane a little bit. Then the
Yeah,
rest of the people that are watching are like, "Oh, what's that you're posting?" So for
yeah.
those kind of things, I might end up spinning up another channel that's not
Mm.
related to the first one if I go into those topics, because I think a lot of people are just looking, they're gadget people or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see. I want to do it. And by the way, anytime if you want to nerd out on Star Wars, or I'm not as much into Star Trek, I can probably hold my own on like Indiana Jones, Fast and the Furious, any of
Mm.
those things, like all the nerd movie series. Lord of the Rings is my wife's thing, I would say more, but yeah, I'm decently knowledgeable there as well. So happy to sync on those topics at some point too.
Oh, count on it. We will do it in the not too distant future, my friend. I am sure. Right, we will let you go, Jeremy, and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope it's not too unpleasant in the heat for you. It certainly is here in the UK, but I'm going to go and turn in now as it's quite late. But you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And there you go. What a great conversation. I so enjoyed talking with Jeremy. It was so great for him to give me so much of his time so generously, and on a weekend as well. So Jeremy, thank you so much. It means a lot. And I look forward to having you on the channel again in the not too distant future. Let me know what you think about the conversation and what your experiences have been with everything that we discussed with Copilots and extensibility and grounding and all that sort of stuff. Really fascinating indeed. Right. Off we go, another video in the bag. Please remember to hit that subscribe button if you've not already done so. Become one of the 8,000 and climbing of this growing community. Check out the join button also to see the membership packages available to you also. And I will see you next time very soon on another video. Take care. Bye-bye.